Okay, go ahead, Cindy, take it away. Great, looks good.
And the only question
I'm
is,
sorry, other folks, please make sure you do mute yourselves, please.
And Chris, are you hearing me? Am I unmuted on this?
Yes, Cindy, I can hear you. You're sounding coming loud and clear.
Perfect. Chris started this series of Porch chats to encourage people to gain the information, to seek the mentoring, to collect the data and the skills to be able to begin going cross country. And I realized from our audience that many of us have already flown cross country, maybe in airplanes, maybe in gliders, but the session this evening was Chris's request to say, talk about your first cross country or your early cross country experiences and what did you learn from that particular situation. And originally we thought we'd have 3 or 4 presenters, and he asked me to fill a little more time, so I collected a little more information. I have a lot of flying experience now, more than 6,000 hours total time, a glider instructor, a commercial pilot in gliders. I've flown 232 rides in Grobe and 233 and ASK 21 rides, flown acro rides. I'm a private pilot in airplanes, which qualifies me for towing. I can tow in tricycle or tailwheel aircraft. When I was doing some safety pilot duty for cross-country work for another pilot, he wanted to self-launch his glider and used a jet engine to do that, which means I needed to be type rated in a glider jet to launch myself. So over the years, I started out with aero tow. I added ground launching, both drove a winch and launched from a winch, and have self-launched. Along the way, I did several efforts at achievement. I added my diamond badge. I had 7 U.S. national records, many of which have now been superseded, but that still was cross-country work. But that was not where I began. Okay, where I began in soaring was considerably more humble in the beginnings. It was long, long ago in a land not so far away from my current launching site with Antelope Valley Club. It was a different century, and we flew from El Mirage. I was only 17 years old at the time, and the ship that was available to me for that particular afternoon was the beloved Schweitzer 126. I had a part-time job working at the airport. I was the desk gal. I took customer appointments when they phoned in. I was the cashier for paying for tows and rental services. I did logbooks on the gliders. There was a cafe on the field, and I was the occasional cook in the cafe when they had another gal to work in the office truck. In the summertime, I worked basically full-time, and in the winter, they cut back your hours, and I only flew on weekends. So the wages were small, but you got discounted flight time if you wanted to learn to soar. And during that period of time, I made it to solo student status. And the staff only got to fly when everybody else was done, or the weather wasn't so great, or things weren't so wonderful. But I became a solo student. And you say, what did the airfield look like that we flew from? Some of you are familiar with the airfield. Some of you are only familiar with stories of the fabled El Mirage soaring site. It was an equilateral triangle, as many of the airfields are in the Southern California desert. It was originally built in the early to middle 1940s to train pilots to be able to go to war in Europe and the Pacific Theater. So regardless of what the weather was on a given day, you needed to be able to take off land into the wind. So they slapped down China Lake and Inyokern and Hawes and Helendale and Mojave and Gray Butte and El Mirage and a lot of airfields with this particular design and layout. When the war ended, the airport was sold as military surplus, and the Brigleb family scraped together every penny that they could and loans from friends and investments, and they bought the entire premises, a square mile. And over the period of time, they improved with some permanent buildings adjacent to the airfield, probably one of the most important and the hubs of pilot operations, pre-flight briefings for students and post-flight beverages and logbook filling out took place in the cafe, which was in the beginning the Brigleb's home. They built a separate structure for their home on the field, but the cafe was the hub of operations. They were the first recyclers. They went to Edwards and near Edwards. When Edwards Air Force Base expanded, they took Pancho Barnes's hangar and property to expand the military installation for Edwards. And Pancho sold her hangar to the Briglebs, and they transported it and reconstructed it on the airport at El Mirage. It was the site of maintenance and construction. The Brigleb family designed and Gus designed and sold plans for home-built aircraft, the BG-12 series. Gus's sons, Ross and Kenny, flew to become national champions in racing competitions. It was quite the hub of activity. There were several different places where we would drive a panel van on the airfield to park to be able to run an office and monitor takeoffs and landings and provide a little bit of shelter from the roughness of the weather that can happen on the desert, from the heat and the wind and the blowing sand. The family developed the alfalfa fields around the runways and in some of the infield areas at different points of time as a crop to help sustain the airfield operations. The clubs that operated from the airfield, Southern California Soaring Association, Antelope Valley Soaring Club, Douglas Soaring Club, White Eagle Soaring Club, Phoenix Soaring Club, had a selection of T-hangars and shade hangars to protect their equipment that were jointly built on the airfield. And we had tie downs close to the apex of the runways. We had tie downs further down on the southeasterly end for operations when the wind was out of the west, which was predominant. And another social gathering place was the swimming pool, which was actually a very large irrigation pond for the water that was pumped out to the alfalfa. But as it was immediately adjacent to the entrance and exit road, it again was quite a hangout and a socializing place on the airfield. One of the clubs even built a brick building with real drywalled walls and flush toilets and a big flat shed roof on it that you could sleep on in the summertime. SCSA constructed a building, meeting room, gathering room on the western edge of the populated area. Some of the history of El Mirage was pretty remarkable. The aerospace industry that was developing in the Antelope Valley had a lot of overlap with the weekend recreational flying activities. NASA developed an installation for research also at Edwards Air Force Base, and NASA Dryden was doing quite a lot of aerodynamics research, and Gus Brigleb was contracted to build out of wooden construction something that was nicknamed the flying bathtub, the picture at the far right margin. It was the precursor to lifting bodies and the space shuttle design. It was car towed in the early days with the big Plymouth to provide 100-mile-an-hour towing speed to get the bathtub off the ground with its little bitty tiny wings. Paul Bickle, who set a world altitude gain record in sailplanes that still stands, was the flight director at NASA, was a sailplane pilot, and spent quite a bit of time with the Briglebs at El Mirage. And Gus's wife, Ann, frequently operated the cafe. And when she would hear something, she'd tip her head and say, "Hey, Cindy, throw 5 burgers on the grill," which I, of course, did. And that got me the opportunity to meet Einar Volson and Fritz Fulton and several other of the pilots from NASA as they arrived in a DC-3 for a quick lunch at the airfield. So El Mirage was quite the interesting place to hang out if you were curious about aviation in the 60s and 50s and 70s and early 80s. There were 2 adjacent soaring sites. El Mirage, established in the late 1940s by Gus Briegleb and his family, and Great Western Soaring School, established in the later 1960s by Fred Robinson, first in Agua Dulce and then relocated to Crystal Air. Both those sites operated separately for many decades. Gus got older and was decades weary and wanted to sell the field and not have to operate a glider field. He contracted to a couple groups to do so. Fred Robinson wanted to leave California and ended up going to Texas, and he sold to CalAge Western Corporation. That ended up buying and merging the 2 businesses. Staff was merged, management and aircraft fleets were merged, maintenance merged. I had worked for Fred and now had a chance to work for CalAge and worked at both sites. But on this flying day that we were going to talk about was a really pretty August day, and all the customers were up. And things were pretty quiet and were going to be for a couple hours until fellows all came home from their cross countries in the afternoon. And my CFI, Pat Philbrick, asked if I wanted to fly the 126. Of course. I took a launch, and I couldn't center a thermal to save my fanny. 15 minutes later, I was back on the ground. I was looking at dust devils all over the dry lake that looked just like this picture at AVSC and could not figure out what was up. Not me. Pat came over, and after about 5 minutes of diagnosis, we decided that the mechanical variometer in the 126 was toast. There was less in the instrument panel that I was flying than what you see here. This has got a pretty fancy little, I think, Borgelt variometer in the upper corner, upper right half. But I flew with altimeter, airspeed, compass, because the FAA thought we had to navigate, and 1 mechanical vario. And it wasn't working. So Pat says, do I want to fly and use just the altimeter, or do I want to help him haul it to the hangar and help pull out the instrument, work on it, fix the leaky lines or whatever? It's a great day. It's got great dust devils. What do you choose? I fly, of course. Take my second tow. I release. I flounder. I have to really grit my teeth, take a deep breath, get calm, and concentrate. I know there's lift there. And finally, I climb. After 15 or 20 minutes of floundering around, I decide this really wasn't so tough. If you really were in the lift, the altimeter was cranking up pretty good and became a pretty good variometer. So I climb, and I climb, and I climb to 11.5. Jeez. Now what? I'm not supposed to go above 12.5. I'm not supposed to enter clouds, not really a problem, big VFR day. What am I going to do? So I look around the neighborhood a little bit. El Mirage in this particular chart section is up here at the upper right-hand corner with the dry lake shown. We had done winch launching and things off of the dry lake. We would winch off of the airport, fling the glider into the sky towards the dry lake in the morning, winch off of the dry lake all day, and at the last tow, winch off the dry lake and fling the glider back onto the airport at El Mirage. Our new location at AVSC is halfway between Cray and Gray Butte. It's located just about where this little tick mark is on the sectional chart. But on this particular day at 11.5, somewhere out here in the vicinity of El Mirage or along El Mirage Road, I said, wonder what they're doing at the other company place. How hard could it be to go to Crystal Air? I know the runway. I certainly know the neighborhood. I've grown up in the Antelope Valley. I've driven the back roads across the desert Navigation is not an issue. If I happen to flop down on the ground over at Crystal Air, maybe I could get another tow, or they'd tow me back home over to El Mirage. This will be easy. You got to remember that this is about 1976, maybe, and it can't be 1977 because by then I'd left the desert and gone to the city. There were no cell phones. There was no radio in the glider. There was no chart in the glider. I'm not sure I'd actually ever sat down and tried to figure out how to read a chart yet. I only vaguely knew that Crystal Air was about 20 miles away. A weather briefing? Gosh, who needs a weather briefing? You know, you got dust devils ripping off the dry lake like crazy. It's severe clear. There's a few Q on the San Gabriels. It's August. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. Just laugh, Chris. I go. Guess what? 20 miles is a long way. And when you just point at something and you decide that you're going to glide 20 miles, it takes a long time in a 126. In a 126, 20 miles is going to take the better part of 20, 25 minutes. And it takes a lot of altitude in a 126. But I get to Crystal Air. Oh my gosh, I get to Crystal Air. But this particular picture of Crystal Air is considerably higher than the view when I arrived from the east. I got there, maybe 2000 AGL, seriously looking for a thermal. There's got to be a thermal. There's got to be a thermal. There's got to be a thermal. I am now officially worried. What if I have to land there? Oh my God. Oh my God. What will my CFI have to say? I need to climb. When the pressure's on, your thermaling skills tend to fall apart. You can't center them up. You can't track the drift. It's Crystal Air in the afternoon. You're going to drift east, and there's nothing landable out there to the east. The airport is a huge magnet. It wants to suck the glider down to a landing. I have no vario. I struggle. I resort to negotiation with the Almighty. Please, 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 please give me a thermal. I resign myself to the land out at the other home. And I hook a thermal. And I climb away. And we all promise to never be so impulsive again. And I promise to myself to never fly with incomplete instruments in my vast, I don't know, 50 flights in gliders maybe. And I get really high on the really great lift. And I scream back to El Mirage at what, 70 miles an hour? Oh, God, I'm home. I land very nicely, but I am completely wrung out. Pat comes out to walk my wing into the parking spot. Nice landing. Thanks. How'd it go without the vario? Kind of tough. It takes more attention. Did you have fun? You were about 2 hours? Yeah, but I'm pooped. Maybe I'm going to get away with this. The guys at Crystal thought they were going to get another tow. I'm busted. He didn't scream. He didn't holler. We parked the glider. We arranged for it to go in and get the instrument fixed. And then we had a lot of ground school about no student cross country is allowed by the FARs with very limited exceptions. There's no cross country without a spot landing signed off. In the 126, you ought to be able to touch and stop in about 300 feet. You're not supposed to go cross country without a chart. You're not supposed to go cross country without a radio. You really ought not to go cross country with non-operative instruments. The thermaling is hard enough, particularly as a beginner. You're not supposed to go cross country without reviewing the intermediate landable spots. You're not supposed to go cross country without a weather briefing. I had a headwind going there. I didn't know that. You're not supposed to go cross country without a crew. at least on standby. They might not have to drive, they might not have to hook up a trailer, but at least they know what your intentions are and they're available. And you're not supposed to go cross country without having prearranged retrieve potential. A trailer that's roadworthy, an airplane that's available, and a pilot that's available later in the afternoon. These are the normal things that you should plan with handily before you launch. That's a lot of no's. No cross country, no cross country, no cross country. But in spite of that huge list of no's, what came through truly was concern for my safety, concern for the well-being of the glider. I wasn't beat up verbally, emotionally, dramatically. I was educated to respect the lives and the time of the other people who would become involved if I screwed up. If I didn't make it back home or they didn't know where I was at the end of the day, it was going to put a lot of people out of sorts. So now, 45 years later or so, that's what I try to teach. Care for yourself, care for your glider, care for the sport through insurance non-claims, no accidents, no bad press. And the whole reason we're doing this series is to encourage people to get prepared before they go, because there's plenty of people in this sport that are willing to be mentors, that are willing to help, to educate, to spend time, to go over your equipment, to go over your route, to help you get ready to go. That's a view of the Dust Devils coming off of El Mirage. That's a view of the Cumulus in the shear line pushing in from the Cajon Pass, leading out over the Shadow Mountains, leading out to the right-hand corner towards Sun Hill Ranch, making the arc around the corner towards Barstow. This is the kind of day that you should use for early cross-country attempts. A day that's fairly straightforward for your planned course. A day that gives you a good option for success. Not just, hey, I'm going cross-country Saturday because that's the only day that I have to go. That's not what you're looking for to learn to go cross-country. So if we wanted to go back and chew through my flight for hazardous attitudes mentally about getting ready for this flight, we're not talking about any of the physical work of getting ready, but mentally getting ready, would we say that I was being anti-authority about this particular flight? I don't really think so, because I just had severe ignorance of the limitations that were supposed to happen as a solo student pilot. I wasn't trying to break the rules. I wasn't trying to scare anybody. I wasn't trying to sneak one by. Was I impulsive? Sure. I was very impulsive. I got high, I looked around, it looked like a good day, and I said, let's go play. It was not a planned effort. Was I being macho or overconfident about the flight? A little bit. It was my backyard. I knew where everything was. There was no concern about navigation. I was thinking nothing bad will happen to me because I know where I am and it's a great day. Was I complacent? Yeah, because it was local and I was comfortable. I'd had no real views of bad outcomes in soaring. And I was slightly encouraged to go fly by the CFI, even though I had less than optimum instrumentation. Do I blame him for it? Absolutely not. Okay. Did I experience the hazardous attitude of resignation in the course of the flight? Oh my, I'm going to give up. Oh my, the lift ran out and I'm just going to attack the earth wherever I happen to be. Yeah, I was feeling a little resigned for a few minutes while I was low and struggling at Crystal Air, but I knew I had a runway underneath me and I grit my teeth a little bit and stuck with it until I could climb away. On that particular day, I had never flown cross-country dual in a glider before. I'd never had somebody looking over my shoulder, asking me the questions, prompting me for what I should be calculating, what I should be deciding, what I should be planning as I went along my way. I'd only listen to stories of pilots going places. The fish was this big. The lift was this strong. I had tailwind going both directions on my course. Okay? By the pilots that had been flying around the neighborhood. I'd witnessed glider contests out of El Mirage and turn photos being developed from places that were 100 miles away from home. I thought it was normal to go places in good weather. So since then, I've learned other lessons on cross-country flights. These are not the things that happened on this particular flight, but since then, I've learned about days that have weather changes, days when your batteries for communication or navigation or Varios run low. I've learned that runways are not always runways. They become other things. They might become fields or crops or houses or native desert. Okay, that if I don't inspect them often enough, they weren't necessarily still landable. I learned that oxygen can run out during the course of your flight. I've learned that weather can form quickly along a course or even as a neighbor to you in the sky. Winds aloft and surface winds are often very different. I've learned that pilots don't seek enough continuing training. I come and sign in on these evenings to hear the conversation that happens from other pilots so that perhaps I can be reminded of something, as I'm not going cross country quite so often these days. And if we don't practice the skills of thermaling, of landing accurately, of crabbing for a crosswind on a long leg, skills erode. Reactions slow down as we age. Visual acuity fades as we age. These are things that I've learned as lessons since the day of that first flight. And they're things that you should think about. Okay? All of the items on that list have an associated Cindy story. What was that list? Oh, lots of things. Any pilot who doesn't have stories of regrets of how they handled a situation, if he doesn't have a story of a regret, he's not being very honest with us. He might be somebody to avoid going flying with, or to avoid thermaling under, or to avoid parking next to him where he taxis out on his rollout after a landing. We all have regrets, and we should be willing to share those moments of vulnerability with others so they can avoid those mistakes. That's my presentation, Chris.
Thank you, Cindy. That was really great. I just appreciate also your intro to, how El Mirage got to be a little bit of tidbit. I know there's way more behind that story, but it was fun to hear just the beginning days when you were involved there, which was many moons ago. But a lot of good tips and things that are reminders that I've keep hearing some of the same reminders that you just brought to our attention, and things that we just need to continue to remind ourselves. And every time when we start up the new season, there's all those things that are really critical, important things that we just need to do to make sure we stay and continue to fly safe. So very good. Thank you so much. John Medley chimed in and would like to do a little discussion of a cross-country flight, although it wasn't a long time ago, but that's fine. I think, John, you want to go ahead and give us maybe a 5 minutes, because it's now been on for 45 minutes, so we can go over a little over the hour. Buzz wanted to recount something as well. So, John, why don't you go ahead and give us a little.
Will I be able to share my screen?
You should be able to. It should be shared for anyone.
I have it up on the OLC. I can show the track, but I haven't got there yet. I started gliding in 1986 or so at Great Western Soaring School. I was a new engineer working at General Dynamics Pomona, and me and another young engineer decided we wanted to learn to sailplane. And I'd been flying remote control gliders in the Midwest all my life. And I
John,
knew
maybe just
about,
speak a little louder. For me anyway, your voice is a little bit quiet.
I don't know where my mic is actually.
Okay, so maybe just talk a little louder.
So, I said, I know where we can go. We can go to El Mirage. And we got on this motorcycle. We drove to El Mirage. And when we got there, there was this big chain link fence around it, which I didn't know about. And so we went back to work. And then I learned about Crystal, or Great Western Soaring School. And I went there. And that's where I learned to fly. And that's where I've been pretty much ever since. Can you hear me okay now?
It's about
Okay.
the same, but I can hear you.
All right. Well, I don't know how it would make it any better. But
It's
anyway.
okay. Go ahead.
So I learned to fly in '86 and flew for a while. I didn't really do a whole lot of cross-country flying or much at all. And then I got married and had a family. And for about 10 years, I didn't do a whole lot of anything. Then I got back into it, and I bought a glider. I bought a DG500M because I wanted to go places. And that's a big glider for two people. I generally never flew with anybody, and I used the motor sparingly. But I towed most of the time, and I learned to cross-country fly in that plane. And I flew with groups like the Soaring Safari group and another group I got up together with is called Hole in the Wall, which is a group that goes to different places and does soaring safaris. And on one of those trips, we flew out of Inyokern, and that was June 1st, 2012. And it was a really good day, and I see if I can get this. Excuse me. I think I self-launched on that particular flight, but that doesn't really make any difference. Let's see this one. Share. Okay. And
Now we can see it. Good.
okay, yeah, it scored a 607 points on the OLC, but that's not the memorable part about it. It was a really great day. Once I got up on the Boomer Ridge area, and then got up to Owens Peak, and then you fly up the ridge, the Southern Sierra Ridge up toward Mount Whitney. Then you get close to Whitney, and then you're all the way up to 17,000 pretty quick, and then you fly by Whitney. And then I crossed over the valley to the Whites and Inyos, which is my normal path, but it was north of Whitney. And you lose generally 1,000, 2,000 feet going across, and so I'm still high. And I get over and I'm going up the Whites and going up the Whites and the Inyos. I go by White Mountain and I get to Boundary Peak, and I'm still at 17,000 feet, flying 100 knots or so, just going because it was a great day. So I head off into the blue, it's usually blue anyway, I don't remember if it was, towards Grant Peak, which is up at Hawthorne, up this way. And I don't like this area because it's pretty much no man land, and it scares me a bit. But it was working well enough. I got to Grant's Peak at 14,000. I got to fly over it, which I've always been a little bit low when I got there, but I flew over it. And I turned around and came back, and I hit a couple good thermals, and I was like 16,000 feet when I got up back to Boundary Peak. And right then you're flying kind of on the western side later in the day with the wind coming up, and you can just fly and just soar up the sides and bounce to the next ridge and fly up. And it's just, to me, it's the most fun flying I've ever done is flying along the Whites between Boundary Peak and Shulman Grove. But anyway, just flying along and going along. I kept up at 17,000 feet. I got down a beam, Lone Pine, Mount Inyo, I think it's called. I get Inyo and Owens mixed up. But a beam, Lone Pine, south of Inyo Peak. I was still at 70,000. I decided to cross over to the switchbacks. And I could see, when I went up the first time, it was clear, little clouds, and flying over Whitney was great. Coming back, there was some severe OD developing over Whitney in the afternoon, which is normal. And and I stayed away from it and went south of it and crossed over toward the switchbacks. But on the way across, it's from 17,000, I lost 4,000 feet, which is well more than twice as much as I would normally lose crossing over the valley. So I was down around 13. I was headed toward Olancha Peak, and by the time I got to Olancha, let me see if I can zoom in a little bit better. By the time I got to Olancha, I was below ridge level at 9,000 feet. And let's see, where is it? Don't see my little cursor guy. Somewhere in here. Anyway, somewhere here, I was about 9,000 feet when I got abeam Olancha, or near Olancha, and I said, okay, I'm not finding anything. I can't get back up on the ridge. What am I going to do? There's 2 places to go from here. I generally never consider using my engine. I just never did. I didn't want to use it for emergencies ever. So I said, well, I can go back to Lone Pine, or I can go to Cinder Cone. I'd never landed at Cinder Cone, but I knew it was there. It was a little further away than Lone Pine. I've been to Lone Pine many times. So I said, well, I'll head towards Lone Pine. So I started heading towards Lone Pine, and it was a continuous descent. Let's see. Yeah, over here is the line right here. Okay. And let me just scroll down. It was a continuous descent, and I was flying fast. It was slight headwind going that way, which was mistake number 1. I should not have flown towards Lone Pine with a headwind. And as I got closer, I could see gust fronts and sand blowing off of the area around Lone Pine. So I was heading towards a gust front, which was not a good thing. And as I got about here over Owens Dry Lake, I was maybe 1,000 feet above the ground, which is several miles south of Lone Pine. But I saw I still had it going, and I was going, and I could see Lone Pine, and I was lined up, kind of a little off center, but lined up to go to the runway, which is right here. Let me zoom in some more. You can see the track doesn't make it to the airport. When I got really close to the airport, and I was basically on final, straight in final, I hit the gust front and basically stopped in midair. At that point, I had no choice but to land directly ahead of where I was. And I looked down, there was a small lake, dry lake, very small. I said, oh shit, pulled my boards and dove at it. There was a large bush right on the southern end of it. I decided to go through that bush to get my wheels on the ground as soon as possible, which I did. It didn't have any real effect on my landing, thank goodness. And let me do this, and maybe you can see it better. It's not much of a lake. The bush was right here. Can't get any bigger. The bush was right here. I went through the bush, and once I got through that, I was looking at this. There's a tree right here. I was looking at that tree, so I started a ground loop. Right wingtip on the ground, and it dragged me to the right, and I stopped. I cramped my leg pushing on the rudder, so that hurt, and I had to wait for that to uncramp before I could do anything. But the gust front was still going on. I spun around to that direction. The wind ripped mylar off my wings from the rear. It was blowing behind me, and it ripped mylar off my wings. But that was the only damage to my glider.
Oh.
So it was a quick, unexpected, unplanned outlanding. My only real outlanding I've ever had to do. I've landed places I didn't want to land, mostly airports, but this was a real outlanding.
Yeah.
But I called and told some people from Indian Current I was landing at Longtime and that I was going to need a retrieve and they were going to come and bring my trailer. But unfortunately, we had to drive through this to get to the plane. It was a little bit of a mess, but I had time. I walked it. I cleared off all the glass, and the gate is right here. And it was it's a steep slope to bring a 35-foot trailer down. But we made it in, got home safely. But it was my most memorable flight because of what happened. But I learned not to fly towards the gust front ever. Kevin Waite was flying that day, and he basically flew the same flight I flew, but he went, instead of crossing over towards the switchbacks on the way back, he flew down near the restricted area on the other side of the valley, and there happened to be a convergence line running through there at that time, and he stayed high and got back to Indian Current with plenty of margin. I think he got a 1,200K flight that day. So, a 1,200 kilometer flight, yeah. So it was really good for him, but I could have got, if the lesson one was go downwind towards Coso instead of going to Lone Pine into the gust front. That was my number one thing. I have a much higher appreciation of gust fronts now.
Great, yeah, that's quite
my story.
Yeah, that's a pretty good story, and definitely a good lesson learned. And
yeah, I also hit a dead cow skeleton that chipped the bottom of my flat. But other than that was no big deal. But,
yeah, it does seem like you got pretty lucky with being able to have that dry lake, sooner
all
than
these
later.
bushes were 6 feet high, so if this little lake wasn't here, I would have been in bad
Out
condition.
of luck, yeah.
Hey, John, I have a question. So let's back up like 5 minutes before your landing. What the best decision at this point should have been?
5 minutes before the landing, I was at 9,000 feet at Olancha Peak. And that was where I made the first wrong decision. Well, I shouldn't have crossed the valley in the first place, but that was my normal modus operandi, to cross the valley and go back down the Southern Sierra. And but at Olancha, I decided to go north towards where the serious OD over Mount Whitney was, closer, rather than fly closer to my destination to Cindercone, which is a nice big dry lake that we all know how to land it in from any direction. Although I had never done so I was a little reluctant to go there, even though I knew it was a good place. But so I went for the place I knew, which was Lone Pine, which was not the best choice.
So I'm kind of curious why you were so reluctant to use the engine.
Well, I try to read up, and you don't want to save your life with the engine because the chances of it starting are not always 100%. And if you pull it out, you are going to put yourself in a worse condition if it doesn't start. Yeah. So I said, I can make Lone Pine, so there's no reason to pull it out and waste my chance to get to Lone Pine. Because if it doesn't start, you're landing in Owens Dry Lake, which is not a good place necessarily either. There's hardly any place.
John?
Yes?
John, can you zoom out a little bit on your OLC satellite picture? Stop.
Way out.
You're so
Way out.
That's way out.
You can make
Okay, stop there for a minute. Stop there for just a minute. Stop moving. Whoa, baby.
I'm stopped.
Okay.
There's a lag.
Click in, zoom in once more. Just one more click. Now, don't move anything. Where your left wingtip is for the glider depiction right now.
Right.
where your left wingtip is right now, on the east side of 395, in the margin of Owens Lake, I gave aerial directions to a pilot to land at that very location.
All right.
It is a trapped puddle that is trapped between a farmer's fence and 395. So now that you know the location that I am talking about on that satellite picture, go ahead and zoom in on it a little bit for everybody.
Yes, I know about that place now. I see it every time I drive through 395. Yep.
Okay, and I had seen it when we had done Longtime camps, and I'd stopped and got off the highway and come in on the dirt road that comes in from the north, which is where the farmer comes in to catch his cows on that little salt pan right there. And that's plenty big enough to land a sailplane on.
Yep, it is. Definitely.
Yep, it is, definitely.
Yeah. At this point, I'm.
Now, the thing that makes people reluctant to use it is the line of telephone poles that is exactly left wingtip.
Buzz Graves, you have background noise. Can you?
I think it's, I don't know if it's from Cindy, there's a lot of, it's looping, the audio is looping or something.
Yeah, I understood. That's why I waited for a minute.
Yeah, if everyone else would just mute so that we can only have just John and Cindy for now.
But that's a landable spot.
Yep, I know about that spot now. I didn't really know about it then, but it was there. So anyway, I learned a lot on that flight. It was an easy flight to go far, but I learned a lot at the very end. And it was almost a very hard lesson, but it turned out to be a good lesson. And I did the right thing at the right time, and I survived without damage, basically without damage. So what could I have done better? Well, turning south to Coso would have been better, or flying across the valley to the convergence, which I couldn't tell was there because it was blue, but I wasn't in contact with Kevin Waite to know that it was there when he was flying it. So anyway,
Having a little more familiarity with landable spots would have given you better options. How high were you at that particular spot?
331 meters is what it says above the ground. So I was 1,000 feet right there.
Mm.
I could have turned,
Which would have given you a nice pattern for landing on that spot. Could
have done it really well.
Yeah. Thanks, John. No, that's
anytime you're going straight into a field like you did is really, I mean, you roll the dice more than anyone would ever want to. And so the field that Cindy just pointed out, if you did a pattern over it, I think we'd all be sitting here, wow, you did some good things. But I think you really, really, really didn't do the right thing by doing straight into something you knew nothing about. You were just plain lucky.
I was not expecting the headwind.
Right. Yeah, no, it's like you said, I mean, some good lessons learned, and you're fortunate to be here with Blink giving us that story, and certainly it's something you'll probably won't ever do again. So that's part of what we learn when we do those kind of things, and it's definitely difficult times when you have to make decisions within 60 seconds or so.
Say, John, this is Walt Rogers. Can I just make a quick comment here?
Sure.
Before, well,
yeah, I've seen this with inexperienced low-time cross-country pilots. When you have to make it, when you're getting a little low and a little uncomfortable, frequently what they will do is they will turn to the best landing site and that they know of from their map or their database, rather than perhaps go to a not as good a landing site, but sufficient, that is in the direction of lift, good weather, rather than poor weather, which the direction you went, and you already admitted to that that was a wrong decision to go back towards Lone Pine. So the rule of thumb that I've used is go for the good weather rather than the nice big airport, but only if you do have an option to put it down in that direction of lift. Now, it might not be an optimum landing spot, but the chances are you're going to recover from it and climb away, even though you gave up landing in the opposite direction at a good runway, which in your case, things didn't work out well. So I just want to leave all of you with that comment.
Yeah, my plane was at 22 meters, so I can't use a lancha strip. There is the field across the freeway from it, which is perfectly fine. The fallow field, as it's known.
I landed in that once.
Yeah, so
It's not landable anymore.
But at 9,000 feet, I thought I could make Longtime. So
yeah,
you know, but it was 10 knots down most of the way, and that didn't make it.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I'd like to make a comment about the engine. I fly a DG 800, and this is the sort of the thing that I use. I've had that plane now about 16 years. I've got a lot of cross-country time in it. And what I use, if I'm going to consider using the engine, but I try to make this decision as I'm flying, that once I start getting low, then I establish a good landing field within a 10-to-1 glide. And then that 10-to-1 glide will cover the worst circumstances, good field. And then once you have that good field in sight, then you know, learning how to use the engine and being understanding its people when they try to use the engine in bad situations, even and so that's really a good thing to think about. But it's one of these things that if you are going to use it, just understand that there's a way that you can think through a process and a plan that'll allow you to try that safely. And as long as you have a 10-to-1 glide to a good field, you can use the engine. And I never try to use the engine anything lower than 2,000 AGL, just to take into account those kind of like uncertainties. I've had to land with the engine out already a couple times, and it was uneventful. But that's because I had a plan, and I had planned ahead of time. But I can also tell you the self-retrieves that I've used, taking advantage of that engine, has allowed me to do amazing things over the 16 years that I've owned this glider. And it's just an asset that basically some people are more comfortable with than others. I'd be glad to spend as much time as you'd like, maybe offline here, to talk about, you know, flying a motor glider and basically all the things that I've used. I've been flying 16 years. I've never had a bad accident in this plane, never. And yet I've used, and some of my cross-country years are, I'm doing 25,000 kilometers in this plane. I fly all the way across Utah, Nevada, up and down California, from the Bay Area almost down almost down to Mexico. And I've used the self-launch capability on occasions just as a self-retrieve. But I do so with that plan. If I don't see a green dot within a 10-to-1 glide ratio to it, I don't pull the engine out. It's just not what I do. I mean, if I backed your trace up and saw where you turned around, I kind of think there was lots of opportunities to actually execute that plan. Not to say that it was the best plan. And you said you didn't want to use the engine. I respect that. But you had options to do that exact plan that I basically just described before you turned back into a gust front. That is kind of scary. That is kind of scary.
Buzz, I appreciate your feedback.
Buzz, I
and
appreciate
maybe
your
some
feedback, and
some of the time we'll maybe talk more about the kinds of flights
more
you've
about
had,
the
which are
kinds of
more
flights
for
you've had,
experienced
which are
pilots,
more
and
for
forward to
experienced pilots,
also
and
have motor
forward to
gliders.
also
So,
have
well, maybe we'll circle back to you and your thoughts
back to
at
you
a
and
later
your
time.
thoughts.
Since we're trying to focus on, getting the
We're
new
trying to focus on
guys to be
getting
more
the new
comfortable and understand,
guys to be more
what
comfortable,
tools and
understand,
techniques they need.
what
But your insights are definitely, something,
definitely,
with kind of experience,
something,
definitely
which
we'll
experience
appreciate that.
definitely.
John had John Chapman had a good suggestion. John, where was that again? How about we take a look at the first 50-mile trip before we get into diamond flights? So I've asked John to think about that and see if maybe in a future flight story he would recount one of flight just as that for us to look at the shorter flights and where and how those can be good learning tools and stepping stones for getting farther along for us newbies out there. So yeah, we've been at this for a little over an hour now, and I think we're going to maybe call it quits for tonight. And I will circle around to other folks who are interested in future flight stories. Just to let you know where we stand for the future of April Porch Chats. Next week, Walt will be returning to us for his weather briefing and some more insights on soaring, cross-country soaring weather tools and techniques. And then after that, we will be talking to Dan Ryan, and he will be talking about using the OLC trace, which we've just seen tonight and other times, and that's as a tool to help you learn from what other pilots have done and looking at those flights. So Dan will hopefully be ready the second weekend for that. And then we return back the third weekend. We'll be talking to back to Scott Wiley. About the good, the bad, and the ugly. And this the good, the bad, and the ugly. Where he reveals some of his good decisions and how he learned a lot from them. So that's what we have to look forward to for April, and I will put together a little flyer and send that around to folks so you can add that to the calendar. So if I don't think there's any other comments.
So I'd like to say one thing, and it just today SSA announced they had a new website.
Yes.
And you go
really
there,
good.
and it was to my very much of a disappointment that the thing that our glider community has used as a matter of a safety net is what we use SA Tracker to try to keep track of people. And now SSA decided, well, if you pay us money, you can now use that. In other words, they want you to become a member. And I think it's just such a bad idea from their part for a safety, issue like what Tracker can do for the entire community and why they're holding hostage now. You got to be an SSA member to use it. It's kind of disappointing.
I appreciate.
I'm going to try to spread this around.
I'm going to mute you because that's not what this Porch Chat is about. It's not a platform to talk about SSA. So you're going on mute. Thank you, everybody. Thanks you for your time tonight, and we appreciate y'all being here. Good night.